Before the rise of the Antichrist, there was a city in the ancient world that Jesus called the throne of Satan. Pergamum, situated in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, Pergamum stood as a monumental city, rich in history and power. It was a center of politics, religion, and even pagan rituals, making it a significant place in the Roman Empire. This city wasn't just a place for ordinary people, it was where emperors were worshipped as gods, and where the world's most powerful individuals and priests come together. The city of Pergamum thrived as one of the grandest and wealthiest cities in the 1st century CE. While there were many cities in the Roman Empire, few could match the level of influence that Pergamum had. It was renowned for its massive temples, towering structures, and intellectual influence. Among its most famous landmarks was the Great Altar of Zeus, which, with its intricate design and symbolic depiction of divine power, captured the attention of visitors from across the empire. To understand why Jesus referred to Pergamum as the throne of Satan, we need to delve deeper into the significance of its temples and idols. During the time of early Christianity, the Christian church was facing an intense struggle against idol worship and the deification of rulers. The Great Altar of Zeus stood as a symbol of this powerful form of idolatry. Built in the 2nd century BCE, it was not just an architectural marvel. It was a testament to the pagan beliefs that dominated the city. The altar was adorned with an epic frieze depicting the battle between gods and giants, illustrating the victory of divine forces over evil. However, for early Christians, the altar represented something far darker. Jesus himself warned the church in Pergamum in the book of Revelation, stating, "I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is." This wasn't just a casual remark. Jesus was pointing to the pervasive and dangerous idol worship that had taken root in the heart of the city. For the followers of Christ, refusing to bow to pagan gods was not only a theological stance, it was an act of defiance. In Pergamum, many Christians suffered persecution, torture, and even death because they refused to participate in the emperor worship that was so deeply ingrained in the culture. But it wasn't just the Great Altar of Zeus that earned Pergamum its infamous reputation. The city was home to a number of temples dedicated to various deities, including Athena, Dionysus, and Asclepius, the god of healing. Asclepius, in particular, was a widely revered god, and his temple in Pergamum became a popular destination for those seeking cures and remedies. People from all over the empire came to seek healing at the temple, which was believed to have miraculous powers. However, the rituals performed at these temples were not the pious acts of worship many would assume. They were steeped in pagan customs and practices that were at odds with Christian beliefs. One of the darkest aspects of life in Pergamum was the worship of the Roman emperors as gods. In 29 BCE, the city constructed a temple dedicated to Emperor Augustus, making it one of the earliest centers of emperor worship. This practice would continue for centuries, with many emperors taking on divine status after their deaths. For the early Christians living in Pergamum, this was a direct challenge to their faith, as they were required to acknowledge the emperor as a god, something they could never do. The refusal to participate in emperor worship often led to brutal consequences, including execution. Many early Christian martyrs, like Antipas, are believed to have been killed in Pergamum because of their defiance. To early Christians, the city was a place of temptation and evil, a direct opposition to the teachings of Christ. But what was it about the city itself that made it the throne of Satan in Jesus' eyes? To answer this question, we must look not only at the grand monuments and idols, but also at the spiritual and political forces that influenced the city. Pergamum was a center of both religious and political power. The emperor worship cult that flourished there gave the rulers of Rome unchecked authority, making them not just political figures, but divine ones as well. This atmosphere of religious power, combined with political oppression, created the perfect storm for early Christians. They were caught between the wrath of pagan worshippers who were intent on forcing them to participate in idolatry, and the Roman authorities, who saw their refusal to worship the emperor as a threat to the empire's stability. This tension led to some of the most brutal persecutions faced by Christians in the Roman Empire. Among the many temples in Pergamum, the Great Altar of Zeus stood as the most significant. It wasn't just a place of sacrifice, it was a symbol of divine power, pagan divine power. For the ancient world, the altar was a reminder of the god's supremacy, and it was viewed as a place where the divine could interact with the mortal world. The altar itself was a massive structure, constructed to honor the Greek god Zeus, king of the gods. The frieze that decorated it told the story of the gods' battle against the giants, a cosmic struggle between good and evil. However, for Christians, the altar took on a much more sinister meaning. Jesus' mention of Pergamum as the throne of Satan may have been linked to this very altar. In the book of Revelation, the church in Pergamum is warned about the dangers of living in a city so steeped in idolatry. Christians in Pergamum faced intense pressure to conform to the pagan ways of the city, which included the worship of idols and even the emperor. The early church saw the Great Altar of Zeus as a monument to the false gods that ruled the land, and it became a symbol of everything they stood against. Some scholars speculate that the martyr Antipas, mentioned in Revelation, was executed in close proximity to the altar itself. According to Christian tradition, Antipas was roasted alive in a hollow bronze bull, a cruel and horrific execution method that was used in ancient times to punish those who defied the gods. His death served as a chilling reminder of the fate awaiting those who refused to participate in emperor worship and idolatry. As time passed, the significance of Pergamum and its infamous altar would take on a new life in the 19th century, during a time of great political and social upheaval. In the late 1800s, German archaeologists, led by Karl Humann, excavated the ruins of Pergamum and uncovered the remains of the Great Altar of Zeus. Rather than leaving it in Turkey, the Germans decided to transport the altar back to Berlin, where it was meticulously reconstructed in the Pergamon Museum. But why would Germany, in the late 19th century, be so interested in such an ancient and dark relic? The answer may lie in the growing obsession with power, symbolism, and national identity that was sweeping through the country at the time. As Germany sought to assert itself as a dominant force in Europe, the cultural and historical legacy of ancient civilizations became an important symbol of their greatness. The Pergamon altar, with its ties to power and divine authority, was a perfect fit for the narrative the German Empire wanted to create. However, the altar's relocation to Berlin did not stop there. As the 20th century progressed, Germany's political landscape would become dominated by one of the darkest regimes in human history, the Nazis. The connection between the Pergamon altar and Adolf Hitler's rise to power is both mysterious and chilling. Hitler was known for his fascination with ancient symbols, occult practices, and the quest for supernatural power. Many historians believe that the Nazi regime was not just about political dominance. It was rooted in a belief that ancient forbidden knowledge could grant them ultimate power. This brings us to the Zeppelin Tribune, a massive structure built in Nuremberg for Nazi rallies. Designed by Albert Speer, Hitler's chief architect, the Zeppelin Tribune bore a striking resemblance to the Great Altar of Zeus. The grand steps, the dramatic appearance, everything about it seemed to echo the grandeur of ancient monuments. Could it be that Hitler and the Nazis saw the altar as a powerful symbol? Something that could help them claim divine right to rule? The rituals and ceremonies performed at the Nazi rallies, with their torchlit processions and speeches that bordered on religious fervor, seemed to have a mystical quality. Was this just a coincidence, Or was there a deeper, more disturbing connection? The story of the Pergamon altar doesn't end in the 1930s, as its presence continued to shape the course of history in unsettling ways. After its transport to Berlin, the altar sat in the Pergamon Museum, hidden in plain sight for the public. But the altar's true role in the events that followed is more profound than most realize. Historians and experts alike agree that the altar became a focal point for those who believed in tapping into ancient powers that could give them dominion over the world. During the rise of the Nazi Party, Hitler and his inner circle delved deeply into occult practices, and many of the Nazi elites believed in the power of ancient relics and symbols. They thought that by possessing certain artifacts from the past, they could gain supernatural powers. The Pergamon altar, with its sinister connection to idolatry and emperor worship, may have been one of the many ancient symbols that Hitler believed could help him establish ultimate control. It's well documented that Adolf Hitler had an unhealthy obsession with ancient relics and symbols. He believed that these artifacts, particularly those tied to pagan mythology, could grant him power. One of the most famous of these relics was the Spear of Destiny, which was said to be the weapon that pierced Christ's side while he was on the cross. According to legend, whoever possessed the spear could control the fate of the world. In addition to the Spear of Destiny, Hitler and his followers were also keenly interested in other objects that were believed to possess occult powers. This is where the connection between the Pergamon altar and the Nazi regime becomes even more disturbing. The altar was symbolic of pagan power, emperor worship, and even human sacrifice, all elements that resonated deeply with the Nazis' belief in the supernatural. Hitler's fascination with the occult wasn't just symbolic. It had real consequences. He surrounded himself with occultists and mystics who believed that they could harness the energy of ancient sites like the Pergamon altar for the advancement of the Nazi cause. Even Albert Speer, Hitler's chief architect, was involved in this mystical atmosphere. Speer's design for the Zeppelin tribune, which mimicked the grandeur of the Pergamon altar, suggests that he too understood the power of ancient imagery and symbolism. As the Nazi Party rose to power, its leaders pushed an agenda that was not only political, but deeply rooted in occultism. Heinrich Himmler, one of Hitler's most trusted commanders, was a firm believer in mysticism. Himmler even established a secret society called the 𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐻, a group dedicated to uncovering ancient artifacts and tapping into ancient knowledge. The 𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐻's mission was to gather relics that could give the Nazis a sense of superiority and control over the world. They believed that by rediscovering ancient practices and relics, they could tap into a hidden power that would give them an edge in the coming battle for global domination. This belief in ancient power was reinforced by the image of the Pergamon altar, a symbol of the ancient gods and emperors that could now be used to serve the Nazi ideology. But as much as Hitler and his followers were interested in the occult, the true significance of the Pergamon altar goes beyond just their obsession with ancient relics. The very act of resurrecting the altar, bringing it from Pergamum to Berlin, and reconstructing it in the Pergamon Museum seems to have reawakened a darker force. Some experts suggest that by bringing the altar to Germany, the Nazis were symbolically re-establishing the pagan order that had once been condemned by Jesus himself. One of the most disturbing connections between the Pergamon altar and Nazi Germany was the use of similar symbolism during the infamous Nuremberg rallies. Albert Speer's design for the Zeppelin tribune was a striking replica of the Pergamon altar, and its towering steps and dramatic podium were meant to evoke the same feeling of power and awe that the ancient altar had inspired. The Nuremberg rallies, with their torch-lit processions and Hitler standing at the podium, resembled ancient rituals designed to enthrall the masses and solidify Hitler's control over them. Speer's Zeppelin tribune wasn't just a stage for Hitler's speeches. It was a platform for the Nazi regime to assert its dominance. The massive structure was a symbol of the power that Hitler and his followers believed they were entitled to. As Hitler stood at the podium, delivering speeches that called for the domination of the world, he wasn't just addressing the crowds. He was performing an ancient ritual, one that harkened back to the worship of false gods. Hitler and the Nazis were not merely creating a new political order. They were seeking to revive the pagan rituals of the past. The Pergamum altar, with its pagan imagery and history of human sacrifice, was now at the heart of the Third Reich. Whether they realized it or not, Hitler and his inner circle were playing with fire, tapping into forces that had been condemned by both Christianity and history. The role of the Pergamum altar in Nazi ideology cannot be overstated. Hitler's speeches, delivered from the Zeppelin tribune, were not just political, they were rituals designed to invoke the power of the ancient gods. The image of Hitler standing at the podium, surrounded by thousands of adoring followers, was meant to mirror the worship of ancient emperors. In a way, Hitler saw himself as a modern-day emperor, entitled to rule with divine authority. The connection between Hitler and the ancient gods was reinforced by the symbols and rituals of the Nazi regime. The swastika, for example, was an ancient symbol of power used by many cultures throughout history, including the Indian subcontinent and ancient European civilizations. By adopting such symbols, Hitler and his followers were not just creating a new political system. They were invoking ancient powers, hoping to use them to control the future. It's worth considering how much Hitler's belief in the occult influenced his decisions and his perception of his own power. As a leader, he was not simply interested in traditional politics. He was deeply influenced by the idea that he was fulfilling a divine or supernatural destiny. And in many ways, the Pergamum altar, with its rich history of pagan worship and emperor veneration, served as a symbol of this twisted worldview. Today, the Pergamum altar is on display in the Pergamum Museum in Berlin, where it continues to attract millions of visitors every year. But its legacy is more than just historical, it's spiritual. The altar represents the struggle between the forces of light and darkness, between the worship of the one true God and the worship of false gods. Some believe that by studying the altar and understanding its history, we can gain insight into the dangers of idol worship and the corrupting influence of power. Others see the altar as a reminder of the destructive force of fascism and the dark period of history that the Nazis unleashed. Regardless of how we view the altar, one thing is clear. Its presence in Germany during the rise of the Nazis was not just a coincidence. It was a powerful symbol of the darkness that the Nazis sought to harness. And in many ways, it was a harbinger of the horrors that would follow. As we continue to study history, it's important to remember the lessons of the past. The Pergamum altar and the events surrounding it serve as a reminder of the dangers of idol worship, the corrupting influence of power, and the tragic consequences of fascism. In understanding the past, we can hope to avoid repeating its mistakes. While the Pergamum altar has remained a symbol of power and mysticism, its influence didn't end with the fall of the Nazi regime. In fact, the legacy of the altar continues to shape global events, power structures, and the study of ancient civilizations. The aftermath of its return and the continuing fascination with its history speaks volumes about humanity's enduring relationship with the past and how ancient relics still shape our world. After World War II, Europe was left in ruins, and the political landscape was forever altered. The Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union created an atmosphere of intense competition, not just for territory and political ideology, but also for access to knowledge, artifacts, and relics that could confer power. During this time, the Pergamum altar became more than just a museum exhibit. It became a symbol of the ancient conflict between the forces of good and evil. In the aftermath of Nazi Germany the Pergamon altar's significance only grew, as both Western and Eastern powers recognized the importance of such relics in shaping the future. The United States, deeply involved in the battle against Soviet communism, came to see the ancient relics and symbols as tools to influence the masses. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, with its own belief in the power of ancient history and religion, sought to control the knowledge of these relics to solidify their power. The Pergamon altar's fate became intertwined with the ideological battle between capitalism and communism, each side looking to claim the ancient symbols that could prove their superiority. The post-war world also saw a renewed interest in the study of ancient cultures and their artifacts. Archaeologists, historians, and scholars turned their attention to the relics of ancient civilizations in hopes of understanding the power structures of the past. The Pergamon altar, as one of the most significant and dramatic relics of ancient Greece, became a focal point for such studies. However, the altar's story was not just about ancient Greece. It had been inextricably linked to the dark events of the 20th century. Its journey from Pergamum to Berlin had left a deep mark on the world, and its connection to the Nazis only served to heighten its mystique. Researchers began to question the true significance of the altar. Was it just a remnant of the ancient 𝐸𝐻 world? Or did it represent something more, something darker? While much of the world tried to bury the horrors of the Nazi era, the presence of the Pergamon altar forced people to confront the twisted ways in which the past could be manipulated for power. The questions surrounding the altar's true meaning and its role in the Nazi regime led to a new wave of scholarly investigation, focusing on the relationship between ancient symbols, idolatry, and political control. The Pergamon altar continues to be a symbol of political power and manipulation, especially in times of political turmoil. Today, in an age of global power struggles and shifting alliances, the lessons of the altar remain relevant. Just as it once symbolized the power of rulers to control their people through fear and idol worship, it now serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked political ambition. As the world faces new challenges, whether in the form of authoritarian regimes, cults of personality, or the rise of new forms of ideology, the lessons of the past cannot be ignored. The Pergamon altar's enduring legacy is a reminder of how easily power can corrupt, how ancient symbols can be twisted for modern purposes, and how dangerous it can be to place one's faith in false idols. In many ways, the altar serves as a warning to the world today. It challenges us to question the sources of power and authority that shape our lives. Are we, too, placing our trust in false gods? Are we worshipping idols of materialism, celebrity, or political ideologies? The altar calls us to critically examine the forces at work in our world and to remember the destructive consequences of unchecked power. Aside from its political implications, the Pergamon altar also continues to have a profound effect on modern culture and religion. As one of the most prominent ancient religious artifacts, it serves as a reminder of the religious practices of the ancient world. The altar's depiction of gods and heroes, as well as its symbolism, continues to influence art, literature, and even modern religious practices. The imagery of the altar, with its depictions of battles between gods and giants, resonates deeply with themes of good versus evil, divine justice, and the consequences of human pride. These themes are as relevant today as they were in ancient times, and the presence of the altar in the Pergamon Museum allows people to engage with these eternal questions. In the Christian context, the Pergamon altar also holds special significance. The Bible mentions the altar of Zeus in the book of Revelation, where it is associated with the city of Pergamum. In this context, the altar is seen as a symbol of idolatry and pagan worship, practices that Christians are warned against. The existence of the altar in the Pergamon Museum, then, is a reminder of the dangers of turning away from the true worship of God and embracing false idols. The altar's ongoing role in religious thought and reflection underscores its lasting impact. As a representation of ancient power, it forces us to confront the complex relationship between religion, politics, and culture, and the dangers of elevating earthly powers to divine status. Ultimately, the story of the Pergamon altar is one of power, corruption, and the manipulation of the past to serve present agendas. Whether it's in the context of the ancient world, the rise of fascism in the 20th century, or the political struggles of today, the altar stands as a symbol of the dangers of idolatry and unchecked ambition. In the end, we must remember that the Pergamon altar's journey is not just a historical tale. It is a cautionary story that reminds us of the power of symbols, the allure of false idols, and the corrupting influence of those who seek to control the world through manipulation and fear. The altar's legacy is a lesson that remains relevant for all of us, urging us to stay vigilant and to resist the temptation to place our trust in anything other than the truth. As we reflect on the story of the Pergamon altar, let us remember that power, when misused, can lead to untold destruction. But by learning from the past and striving to uphold the values of justice, truth, and humility, we can break the cycle of corruption and build a better future for all. That's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on our latest content, and make sure to let us know in the comments where you're watching from.